60 Minutes, Rewind.
The magnitude 9 earthquake that struck Japan on March 11, 2011, not only shook the ground, it shook the Japanese people's faith in their government and the nuclear power industry. You can see the impact of the disaster in the towns right around the plant, only you can't get there. The earthquake did some damage, the tsunami did more, but the reason many of them are empty and off-limits today is because of the nuclear accident at the Fukushima power plant next door. The whole area is now a radioactive wasteland, and the people who live there don't know if they'll ever be able to go home. Many don't know if they'll want to. 3 years later, the events of March 11th darkened their lives so deeply that many speak of it simply as 3/11. The hell that broke loose on March 11, 2011 was the strongest earthquake in Japan's history. When the shaking stopped, the tsunami raced toward shore with as much fury as nature can muster. Almost all of the more than 18,000 people who died that day on Japan's northeast coast died in the flood. The quake didn't do much damage to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, but the tsunami shut down the reactor's emergency cooling systems and they started to melt down. Hydrogen gases inside the buildings then exploded, spreading radiation into communities more than 25 miles away. Today, in the town of Tomioka, the radiation levels are considered safe enough to allow people in during the day. Loudspeakers warn visitors that they must leave by 3 p.m. We were alone on the day we were there. The disaster seems to have stopped time. The clock shows 2:46, the moment the earthquake hit. And the damage to shops and homes looks like it could have happened yesterday. The stack of newspapers we found were dated March 12, 2011, the day after the quake and tsunami. You can see people had to leave in a hurry. That was the morning the government told people of this town and neighboring towns to get out quickly. Welcome to Okuma, says the sign. Population today, 3 years later, 0. More than 11,000 people left town that day and never returned.
Would you ever want to go back to Okuma to live there again?
Yes, I would like to before I die.
Norah Kimura lived with his wife and 2 daughters next door to his parents. The tsunami killed his father, his wife, and his youngest daughter, Yuna, a bright and cheerful 7-year-old. This is what their homes looked like before March 11, 2011. This is what's left today, foundations and scraps of memories that he keeps in a small box by what was once the front door.
This is a shoe she was wearing that day, which was found in a heap of rubble 6 months after the disaster.
Because of radiation, Kimura can only visit his former home 10 times a year and stay only 5 hours. In February, his allotted day came in the middle of a blizzard. On each visit, Kimura brings flowers to a small shrine he built to honor his family. They were among the 111 people who died in Okuma that day. The remains of 110 have been recovered. The only one still missing is Norah Kimura's daughter, Yuna. 10 times a year, he goes back home to search for her.
On Saturday, you were digging again in Okuma. It was snowing, it was freezing. Why?
To find Yuna, of course. And also, if I stop searching or gathering her things, I will lose the connection with her. To be honest, the reason why I can live my life every day is because I have to find her and her things. I need to do this to keep my sanity.
Volunteers now help Kimura dig through the piles of debris left by the tsunami. Everyone's dressed in protective clothing to limit their exposure to radiation. The digging seems futile, but on this day, Kimura unearthed clothing he says belonged to his surviving daughter, Mayu. On March 11th, the day of the tsunami, Kimura made a mistake for which he will never forgive himself. He was at work on a farm, and he stayed there.
Did you think then that there would be a tsunami?
たまたま職場にラジオがあって
There was a radio at my work, and my boss told me that the tsunami was going to be 3 meters tall.
3メートルの津波が来るようだっていうことを私の家自体が
My house is 5 to 6 meters above sea level, so I was convinced that our home would be fine and didn't worry about it after that at all.
まあ確信したっていうか
Do you think there's anything you could have done to save your family?
すぐに帰ればいい
I should have gone home right away.
安易にその情報を信じてしまったことを
I regret believing the information easily while my family was in life-threatening danger.
的な状況にある
Even now I say to myself, what was I thinking?
気持ちです
When radiation forced the evacuation of Okuma, the town leader told Norio Kimura to stop searching for the missing and start caring for the living. Sahina's daughter moved here to the Japanese Alps, where the brisk air and the snow-capped mountains made radiation and tsunamis difficult to imagine. Kimura has traded farming for a guest house he's planning to open. His daughter Mayu talks about her mother more than her missing sister, and doesn't ask why her father continues searching for her. Their new mountain home is 2,000 feet above the perils of the sea and 180 miles from the Fukushima plant.
The story will continue after this.
Ghost towns surround the plant now, but 3 years later, there are still more than 4,000 workers there, all of them wearing layers of protection. Because of the exposure to radiation, the men in this building are only allowed to work 2.5 hours a day. They're not producing any electricity, they're just cleaning up.
Were TEPCO workers adequately trained to handle the emergency?
I don't think so.
Within months of the accident, Yoichi Funabashi, a former newspaper editor, headed an investigation into what went wrong and why. It was the only investigation not sponsored by the government, and its conclusions were brutal.
I was very much concerned about the government not telling the truth to the public.
The revelations in Funabashi's report added to the public's anger and dismay. He wrote that from the beginning, the government had conspired with the industry to convince people that nuclear power is safe.
So the government effort at the time was to convince people that there was nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Nothing to worry about. Don't worry, okay? Even don't prepare for that, severe accident, okay? Because that would cause that unnecessary unease and unnecessary misunderstanding.
And there's no reason to prepare.
No reason to prepare. So this avoidance ultimately translated into unpreparedness.
Mother Nature threw a real curveball to the Japanese with that huge tsunami.
Last year, TEPCO hired American nuclear engineer Lake Barrett as an advisor. Barrett directed the cleanup at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant after its accident in 1979. It's estimated that the cleanup is going to take 30 to 40 years. To a layman, that sounds very, very long.
To me, that's not long at all. That's what I would expect for that kind of thing. It's a huge challenge. It's a big on-site mess that they have to clean up, and it's going to take them decades to do it. It took us 10 years to do 3 Mile Island, and 3 Mile Island accident was much simpler than they have at Fukushima.
Are they where you thought they would be 3 years later?
I'd hope they'd be further along. It's been challenging technically, it's been challenging culturally and politically for them, but they're making good progress now.
Sounds like you're being a little diplomatic.
Well, the decision-making process in Japan is complicated.
Decision-making in Japan requires consensus, and reaching consensus often takes a very long time. The most difficult job will be to dismantle the melted reactors, but radiation is too high for workers to get there. For now, TEPCO is inundated with groundwater that leaks into the reactors and gets contaminated. Every day, 100,000 gallons of radioactive water has to be pumped out before it reaches the ocean. TEPCO is filling storage tanks almost as fast as it can build them, and they're notorious for leaking. Another enormous cleanup is happening outside the plant. Entire communities are being cleared of contaminated materials that will have to be stored for generations. This part of Japan is known for its agriculture, but the only crop growing now is the multitude of black bags holding the radioactive waste, filling the empty spaces in towns like Okuma. Now, some of the kids from Okuma live and go to schools 70 miles away.
How many of you would like to go back to Okuma? Everybody. How many of you think you will go back to Okuma? What's keeping you from going back to Okuma now? You can tell me.
Because there's a lot of radiation. There's a lot of radioactive material there.
These kids will be middle-aged before the cleanup is finished. Their homes could have been rebuilt quickly if it had just been an earthquake and a tsunami. It's the man-made disaster which will take decades to repair. This is the class that Norio Kimura's daughter Yuna would have been in if she were alive. Her friend Kureya remembers they ate lunch together.
Where is she now?
In Okuma. She's lonely, being alone in the town of Okuma all this time. I think she must be lonely.
About a third of the residents from Okuma decided to stick together and moved into what the government called temporary housing. Temporary is lasting a long time. The 3 generations of Kimuras that once lived together are now split apart. Norio and his daughter live in Nagano, 5 hours away from his mother, Tomoe. She lives in the temporary housing, alone in a cold and cramped room furnished with photographs. The Kimuras, like many Japanese, have a strong connection to their dead and feel obliged to help them be at peace. As long as the dead are in limbo, so are the living.
You've lost so much of your family. Why aren't you together with your son now?
I'm with my husband's ashes now. Once I find a proper place to put him, I'd like to go to Nagano.
What do you think the right place will be?
Our family cemetery in Okuma is contaminated with radiation now. I could come back 2 or 3 times a year to burn incense for him, but my grandchild would not be able to come. I don't want to keep him where his grandchild, whom he used to adore so much, can't even come to visit.
10 times a year, Norio Kimura visits his ancestors in the family cemetery, a place where he thought he would be laid to rest one day, and where his children would come to visit him. But he won't find any peace, he says, until after he finds Yuna.
Do you think there's any chance you'll ever find your daughter?
I know that the chance is very slim. But no matter how slim the chance is, I still cannot stop. From the outside looking in, I know that this is very unlikely, but I still can't stop, even if I cannot ever find her.